Namaste and good evening, everyone. I, Ritika Gupta, Assistant Director at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav Evam Niti Anusandhan Sansthan, Nai Delhi, welcome you to IMPRI #Rep Policy Talk. Today, we are here for a special talk on the status quo in Indian cities, how to break it, as part of the series, The State of Cities #City Conversation. The speakers for today are Mr. Srikanth Viswanathan and Mr. Srinivas Alavilli. I would now like to welcome our moderator for today, Dr. Arjun Kumar, who is director at IMPRI. Sir, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ritika. And I welcome all of you for our series, The State of Cities, #City Conversation. And today's deliberation, the topic is the status quo in India's cities, how to break it. And our speakers for today are Srikanth Vishwanath sir, who is CEO of Janaagraha Center for Citizenship and Democracy at Bengaluru. And we also have Srinivas Alavilli sir, who is lead at IChangeMyCity, the civic tech platform of Janaagraha, and also co-founder of #Steel Flyover Beda movement. We also have to chair this deliberation, Professor Tathagata Chatterjee sir, who is Professor of Urban Planning and Governance at Xavier University, Bhubaneswar. We also have as discussion for this deliberation to contribute Dr. Litha Kamath ma'am, who is Associate Professor at School of Habitat Studies at Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Mumbai. We have Dr. Shubhagato Dasgupta sir, who is Senior Fellow at Center for Policy Research, joining us from Singapore. Thank you so much, sir. We also have Mr. Tikender Pawar sir, who was former mayor at Deputy Mayor at Shimla, and Mr. Samir Unil sir, who is Joint Commissioner, Department of Municipal Administration, Government of Maharashtra. And Soumyadip sir will also join shortly to co-moderate the session with me. So without any further ado, I now invite Tathagata sir to give his welcome remarks and to invite our speakers for today. Tathagata sir, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Arjun Kumar. It's really a pleasure to be in this webinar, and we have really a very august gathering on to discuss about urban issues, and we have a very interesting speaker today, that is Mr. Srikanth Viswanathan and Mr. Srinivas Alavilli, both from Janaagraha. And recently I came across some very interesting papers Mr. Srikanth has written about the 15th Finance Commission. I think, you know, in many ways, the 15th Finance Commission has created a new buzz about the Indian cities and how to take them forward, taking the reform forward. It's a big step. Some of the changes brought in by the 15th Finance Commission, taking the reform forward from the what started during the 74th Amendment. And not only the finances for the cities has seen quite a bit of substantial jump from what was allocated during the 14th Finance Commission period. And but also we see a lot of new changes with a greater focus on metropolitan governance. So specifically, I mean, about 38,000 crore has been earmarked for 15 metropolitan areas, and these grants are subject to performance. These grants are not direct grants, so they are linked to service level benchmarking, greater accountancy, transparency, and public disclosure laws. So if implemented, these changes can really make a very substantial impact on the way the Indian cities do function. But also at the same time, it puts the 15th, some of the 15th Finance Commission recommendations could definitely change the status quo, no doubt. But they can also trigger some tensions, particularly related to the center-state relations. Because 15th Finance Commission has now made it mandatory for the state finance commissions to be set up and give their recommendations with a finite date, and and also the state governments are now required to give action taken report about, what they have done regarding, the suggestions of the state finance commissions. But also, there is every likelihood that this can cause tensions between the center-state relations. In a particularly situation where over the years we are seeing greater centralization of the financial resources in India. That is, the center's revenues are increasing due to increase in surcharge and cess revenue, and not increase in the tax revenue. So, and the state finances are in many cases are in a problematic situations. So this can trigger some amount of problems. Also, there are issues regarding property tax rates. So the 15th Finance Commission has asked that fixing of the property floor rates by the state governments, which can be problematic to implement, particularly for small towns where digitalization is low, and the rates are not really well documented. So this can be a problem. And also this can create tensions regarding conversion of the census towns to statutory towns. But every reform has got their plus sides and minus sides. So I think, today we can learn a lot from these discussions. So I would request now Mr. Srikanth to start his talk. Over to you, Mr. Srikanth.
Thank you, Dr. Tathagata Chatterjee. It's probably the first time that I'm on the same screen with 4 other PhDs or doctors. So even as I'm delighted, I'm also quite nervous getting into this conversation. Thank you, however, for inviting us. I'm also joined by my senior colleague, Srinivas Alavilli. We'll be doing this together. Given that it's a topic where much can be said, I'll straight away plunge into the topic for the conversation and the conversation itself. I guess one of the things that I could notice undeniably, particularly in the last 2-3 years, is a palpable sense of helplessness among various stakeholders in the broad urban sector about how to break the status quo. And to the extent that it became quite ironic that whether you meet political leaders, including state urban ministers, or you met additional chief secretaries handling urban development, or principal secretaries handling urban development, there was a palpable sense of helplessness that cities are becoming very, very important in public discourse and also in politics, but the problems and challenges are fast outpacing the solutions or the rate at which quality of life is improving for citizens. And therefore we'll try and spend most of today not in describing the challenges or even what needs to be done, but hopefully in how the change can potentially be catalyzed. Obviously, we are a practitioner organization, and all of what we say comes from our own experience in working with both communities and governments. We are not researchers or academics, and we look forward to some healthy, constructive debate after we've made our opening remarks. We've basically titled this as the status quo in India's cities, how to break it, which begins with an assumption that there is indeed a status quo. So I'd like to spend a few minutes in describing what we see as the status quo. So if I were to cover 4 broad aspects, which I could call the 4 E's for ease of remembrance, there would be economic growth, jobs and skills, equitable access to both services and to opportunities arising out of economic growth, environmental sustainability, and engagement between citizens and governments. So to repeat that, economic growth, jobs and skills, equitable access to opportunities and services, environmental sustainability, and engagement between citizens and between the citizens and the state. I would hazard to say that there is either been no systematic positive evidence of any significant improvement, or there is evidence of some deterioration. And I say this with a fair degree of responsibility, and probably some would say in a very understated manner, that there has been either no systematic positive evidence of any significant improvement in quality of life in cities across each of these areas, or there is some evidence of deterioration. While there is, I don't want to say it's all gloom and doom, but there has certainly been a lot more political capital that has been invested in cities than before. There are certainly greater degrees of policy focus and resource allocations coming into cities, particularly at the union level, but also at the state level. And when I say compared to before, I'd say this process of change perhaps began with JNNURM showing green shoots, but certainly in the last 5 to 10 years. Many more projects are getting executed. Outlays are much higher. Many more projects are getting executed. Service delivery too is improving. But service delivery, I'd argue, is improving probably slowly and somewhat in a patchy manner. So when I'm saying there is status quo, I'm essentially not referring to the efforts that are being made, not referring to inputs and processes. In some sense, not even just to high-level outcomes, but I'm basically thinking in terms of how well stitched is the fabric of democracy and citizenship in our cities. How well prepared are we for the next 10, 20, 30 years of life in our cities? Will it be a period of our citizens being able to fulfill their socio-economic potential? And in that sense, I'd say we are caught in a status quo. We are caught in a status quo where the incremental effort we are making is just not enough to provide an environment in our cities where citizens can fulfill their socio-economic potential, particularly the urban poor and disadvantaged minorities, but by and large, all citizens. So with that brief elaboration of what the status quo is, in case it required any elaboration, given that all of us experience it on a day-to-day basis in our cities, I'll speak a little bit about what I see as the 3 broad instruments to break this status quo. So in describing these three instruments, I will not focus on sectoral priorities like housing, water supply, or even social security, jobs, migrants, etc. Nor would I dwell on underlying governance aspects of planning, capacities, political leadership, or citizen participation, because at some level, these are all responses to what needs to be done and not really how. And many of us around this table, around this virtual table, have all been working on one or the other of these issues, whether they are sectoral priorities or they are governance priorities. And it's probably time for us to go one level deeper, and which is what we are trying to do today. And I must say, these are reflections of also the kind of conversations we are having internally within the organization with our key stakeholders outside of it as well. So the first thing, the first instrument I'd like to call out is on strengthening administrative capacities. And strengthening administrative capacities, not just at the municipal level, not just at the local government level, but also at the union and state levels. Typically, when we say capacity building, which is a fairly popular and much abused phrase within governments in the context of municipal administration, it's almost as if the union and state levels have the required capacities, and now capacity building has to be done at the local level. But clearly, many of us who work closely with governments recognize that capacities are quite poor at the union and state government levels as well. And this is not just with respect to particular aspects of capacity building, but in some ways I would say across the board. And the more that one starts working with governments, even if it is the union and the state level, not just the municipal level, the more one wonders that infrastructure and service delivery as even as good as it is, because capacities are particularly in the urban domain. And probably some would say it holds true of the entire Indian state. I know Center for Policy Research and others have done more broad-based work on this, but we can say this fairly affirmatively as far as the urban domain is concerned, that administrative capacities are extremely poor across the board with respect to urban governance in India. I'll probably elaborate on it later if there is time in the Q&A section, but I'd call out 4 areas besides sectoral areas. I'd call out 4 areas where we find them to be particularly acute. Spatial planning and design, pretty much non-existent at the local level. And I'm not just counting urban local bodies in this, including parastatal agencies. In most cases, we know the development authorities that handle spatial planning outsource them to consultants, and there's hardly any in-house capacities. Second, public finance management. Third, human resources management. Even as that links to public finance and to spatial planning, if you look at the entire human resource policies, processes, and regulations on how do we recruit staff and team members into the urban sector, both at the state government level and in local bodies and in parastatal agencies. And if you look at what are the structure of incentives, disincentives, training, upskilling, etc., I think it's quite depressing, I would say. In fact, if you had to put your finger, as systems thinkers and systems doers, one would say there is no silver bullet to this challenge, and I would agree with that. But if you had to pick the first among equals of all these systemic challenges, then human resource management it has to be. The fourth area of weak capacities, I would say, is in transparency and citizen participation, where I think governments are totally lost on how to engage with citizens. So these are the 4 areas that I would particularly call out with respect to administrative capacity. So the first instrument of change to break the status quo, I would say, is to strengthen administrative capacities at the union, state, and local levels. The second instrument I would call out is to engage political leaders on urban political economy, to gain a much better understanding of the interrelationship between the urban economy, between politics and governance of cities, and quality of life, particularly with respect to 21st century challenges. I feel the urban discourse in India is largely centered around infrastructure and service delivery. So the definition of quality of life is being viewed through a fairly narrow prism of infrastructure and service delivery. But the intersection of the city as an economy, the city as a place where people come to earn their living, and as a place which attracts investments and talent, and how that intersects with politics and governance of the city, and in turn the consequences that we see as quality of life, as infrastructure and service delivery, is perhaps continues to remain, if at all, within the academic domain and research domain in India, and needs to be mainstream. And that, I hope, will lead to the recognition of the city as a unit of governance and economy. So the reason I'm saying that we need to engage political leaders on urban political economy and gain a broader understanding is not as an end in itself, but to lead to the recognition of the city as a unit of governance and economy, like the country and the state. So we recognize that the city is essentially a place, like the country, like the state, and therefore its governance structures and mechanisms need to reflect those of the union state in some sense. And hopefully that recognition will lead to truly and meaningfully empowered local governments in our cities. So the second instrument, the first instrument was to strengthen administrative capacities. The second instrument that I'm putting on the table is to engage political leaders on urban political economy. The third instrument that I would call out and put on the table is to nurture participatory governance. In some ways, the way we are building this is very crudely put. If you look at the administrative domain or the supply side, you have strengthening of administrative capacity. So the basic foundations of being able to respond to citizens, of being able to build the bare minimum infrastructure and service delivery, and the governance systems around it exist within government. The second, in some ways, is the transmission system of political economy, political leaders, etc., who can carry the voice of citizens and ensure that infuses the administrative mechanism. And on the other hand, the administration is able to reflect back on policy, back through political leaders to citizens. And the third piece of participatory governance is essentially about mobilizing citizens, mobilizing citizen voices, and channelizing that voice through political economy to the administrative and political executive system. So the two things that I would call out here particularly is to engage neighborhood communities and city councillors to build trust, to meaningfully build the third tier of governance in our country by engaging with neighborhood communities and city councillors and creating in some ways and nurturing grassroots democracy in our cities, and through that to channelize voice of citizens into policy and resource allocation. So that transmission is quite important in the context of a city, because unlike domains like foreign affairs or nuclear policy or defense policy, etc., in some ways everything that happens within a city can effectively be subject to participatory governance. So because everything that one does in terms of governance and resource allocation in a city touches the life of a citizen and therefore has to be informed by it. So I'll just take a pause here and summarize the three interventions: strengthen administrative capacities, engage with political leaders in the urban political economy, nurture participatory governance, so that you're able to create a virtuous cycle that is able to break the current status quo and set ourselves in a direction of irreversible, sustainable change in our cities, rather than just episodic changes that we see that arise out of single-minded focus only on infrastructure, service delivery, and schemes around them without looking at root causes. I'd now invite my colleague Srinu to elaborate on nurturing participatory governance, given that it's a fairly interesting, nuanced, and also more real and public in public view, in public domain, and of broad-based interest, not just to academics, researchers, and policy folks, but to all of India in some sense, at least all urban citizens. Srinu leads all our civic participation work in Janaagraha, and as part of that, he's working extensively on participatory budgeting, on deepening grassroots democracy in India's cities, etc. But in his previous avatar, he's also run interesting campaigns in mobilizing citizens and using that to engage with political leaders and effect change. I'll now invite Srinu to talk a little bit in greater detail about nurturing participatory governance in India's cities, and I'll then come back to kind of give my concluding remarks. Srinu?
Thank you, Srikanth. Am I audible? Can you hear me?
Yes, Srinu.
Yes, sir.
May I be allowed to share my screen?
Yes. Yeah. Please try now. Yes.
Able to see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for giving us this opportunity. Like Srikanth said at the beginning, I'm a bit overwhelmed with the kind of wonderful folks that are assembled here. This is not a kind of a talk or a interaction that I do with many other groups that I'm usually connected to. So I'm a little bit intimidated, to be quite frank, but I hope that I won't waste your time, and hopefully we can all discuss some useful things at the end of it. I now run the civic participation group in Janaagraha, where my primary goal is to increase the citizens' participation in local governance, urban governance. How do we empower them in a meaningful way, systematic, institutional way? And I recognize that a political connection with the political class, the politicians, especially the corporator councillors at a municipal level, is a very essential ingredient of that, and that is sorely missing. There is by definition, there is a understanding that all politicians are crooks, and especially local politicians are total crooks. So that itself creates a lot of problems in terms of changing the status quo in the cities. And I am of the opinion that we must first change that if we want to change this. So this particular set of slides that I'm going to walk through is the lessons that I've learned engaging with the political class and trying to bring about change in the city of Bengaluru where I live. But I believe that these principles and concepts are universal and apply in any city. In fact, which is what I'm also trying to do now to fit into the overall framework of Janaagraha that I'm now part of. So as Srikanth mentioned, these are all the different ways in which Janaagraha works. We have a city systems framework. We try to understand the root causes rather than symptoms, and then try to take up a systematic approach, and then figure out whether things are going in the right direction or not. This is the overall plan in which we work. So I present you 2 quick case studies, and then I present the 5 case studies, 5 lessons that I've learned. We have till 7 p.m. for this talk. Can you please confirm the time that we have?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
How much time do I have for this, if you including your interaction, so that way I can pace myself? Can I take 15 minutes, 20 minutes? How much time can I take?
So please take around 10, 15 minutes. Yes. Yes.
Thanks. I'll do that. Okay. So some of you might have heard about this campaign called Steel Flyover Beta. It started with a little, as usual, I was a software engineer at that time. So I started a change.org petition, and then we said, how do you solve the traffic problem? And then government wants to do a flyover, whereas people want public transport. And somehow they always make decisions that are not in the right spirit of democracy or even right spirit of science and technology, right? Flyovers are not designed to solve traffic problem. They actually increase the traffic problem. It's proven world over. It also increases pollution, creates heat islands, all of that. But politicians love to build flyovers for reasons that all of us already know. So I started this petition, and before I know, the petition became a huge campaign, and 8,000 people came on the streets. And it was a human chain that was formed. And next thing we know, the government canceled the project. So success, right? You want to do something and people come together for an infrastructure project. So many people coming onto the streets is not a common everyday sight, but it happened in Bangalore. And there are many reasons why people did this. Some because of the trees, some because of, wanting public transport, so on. But what we understood, the lesson learned is that when people come together in large numbers, government will take notice. So that is one big, takeaway from that. And then, but we were not really trying to do disruptive kind of thing, but we're actually trying to do the right things. Beku in Kannada means want. Beda means don't want. No. Beku means yes, we want this. And what is that? That is suburban train. We wanted the suburban train to come to Bangalore, because Bengaluru, like any other Indian city, had trains from the British era. For 100 plus years, we have the railway network. But unlike Mumbai, we don't have a suburban train system. Somebody once asked me, do you know why Mumbai has twice as much population as Bangalore, but very few vehicles compared to Bangalore? And the reason is suburban train. This is 2016 data at that point, and pre-COVID and all that. So 75 lakh people were using the trains for commute in Mumbai. That is why Mumbai had only 40 lakh vehicles, even though the population is that much. Whereas Bengaluru has only 1.2 crore population. As of today, this number is 86 lakhs. We have 86 lakh vehicles. In fact, we have more vehicles than adult population in this city, because many adults have multiple vehicles. So we are a concrete jungle, and we are also vehicular jungle. So I made this post on Facebook to compare these things, to make people realize that we need to demand this. And as usual, it went on Facebook, and I was virtually nobody, yet another software engineer, but it went viral on social media, and then a lot of more people started demanding for this. Then we created better pamphlets and information communication that showed that this is how the railway network is in Bangalore. If you look at on the top here, there's an airport here, and there's actually a rail network from the city to the airport. And the new airport in Bangalore launched in 2007. In 2021, the first train to city from city to Bangalore happened as a result of this campaign. The suburban trains have now been approved. We've done a massive campaign. Thousands of people boarded the train with all kinds of celebrities and people like that. As a result, there has been a competition between the BJP and Congress. Both of them are competing with each other to provide the suburban train to Bangalore, because they realize that there's a huge public demand for it. As of now, the suburban train project is cleared. 14,000 crores, 19,000 crores has been allocated. work is happening, and already many local trains have been introduced. While we wait for the full-fledged suburban system like Mumbai, there are already some 100 trains running within Bengaluru city to the suburbs like Whitefield and other places. Today, you can take a train to these places, and all of this is a project that saw the light only after citizens got onto the streets and made this demand very, very vocal. The demand has been around for 30 years. Educated people, intellectuals, and many others have asked for this system to be created, but it was always accepted as a good idea, but never taken up. And the result could be the automotive lobby or any number of things. But the point is that once the public pressure has been put, the project started taking off. So what can we learn from these examples of both the cancellation of steel flyover as well as the acceptance of the suburban train system? That's what I try to capture in a few short slides here. So the first and foremost lesson is that when you want to change things, if you want to change status quo, you need to find other people that are willing to work with you. If you have all the best ideas and want to change it, and nothing great is going to happen, unless you are God or you have unlimited purse strings and so on. Even then you wouldn't be able to do these things. You really need to get more and more people to support the line of thinking that you have and what you want to do. So these are my top 5 lessons. I will go through each of them as quickly as possible. The number 1 lesson is about numbers, because the language that the politicians understand is, and usually when I give this talk to students and public policy students and so on, I wait for the response, and they invariably say caste, money, muscle power, like that. But what I actually trying to get at is numbers. They understand numbers. The caste also they understand, because caste gives them numbers. It's not that they're in any particular love with any particular caste or religion or whatever. It's all about numbers. The numbers indicate the vote bank and voting percentage, and therefore in the first past the post system, even a small percentage of votes will make a huge difference. That's what the difference between the winner and loser can be 1 vote. So therefore, there's intense competition between the political players to grab that extra vote. So if you are able to articulate your demand in a way that the political class understands that there is going to be votes behind this number of people that are demanding this particular thing actually means some votes in the actual electoral sphere. If they get that kind of feeling, they're going to respond to it and react to it and bring you into conversation. And I also don't mean huge numbers. Sometimes you just have to be in the right place in the right time. And you have to appear in the public consultations. Often citizens complain and do a lot of complaining on Twitter and social media and all that, but they miss the actual event in which the government is seeking public opinion. They don't send that email. They don't go to the public consultation. But if you start using these things in a formal, respectful way, there's a lot more value that comes to that. This is a protest we did for another project called Elevated Corridor. As you can see, there's so many TV channels here. These are called OB vans. The OB vans are only present because it is such a big gathering and we were being live telecast. And the result of which is that the Chief Minister immediately tweeted. At the time, Mr. H.D. Kumaraswamy was the Chief Minister. While we were still at the protest venue, he tweeted that, can you please stop protesting? Let's discuss this. And we anyway went ahead with our protest. But next day, under 24 hours, we are sitting with him. This is the meeting with the Chief Minister. And he agreed to our demands. And we demanded public consultation, due process, due diligence, all of that. So again, this goes on to show the power of the people. This project has been put on shelf since then. It also doesn't mean that every time you need thousands of people. Here is a meeting where the railway minister was visiting Bengaluru for some other purpose. And we showed up there, just a few of us on a Tuesday afternoon. And we see one of the volunteers is dressed like a clown. And then we had all these placards and everything. As a result of it, the chief minister, the railway minister, all came to us and found out what it is that we are demanding for and gave verbal assurance that we'll take up the project. And that's how the project became a mainstream project. So just a few people being there at the right time in the right place. Another example of influencing the political class, this building is the BBMP Council, the Municipal Corporation Council building, where the monthly meetings of the city corporation happens. All of us showed up there on a Monday morning at 11 a.m. with these placards. What we are demanding is ward committees to be made functional. And as all the 198 councillors of Bengaluru get on from their white Fortuners and enter into the council building, we were standing there and striking a conversation with them. Long story short, we have functional ward committees now, and no protest was made, no animosity, no confrontation. Completely with this kind of approach, we are able to get the ward committees running, which they are now running for 2+ years in Bangalore. More than 2,000 ward committee meetings have happened. It's not perfect yet, but the process has started. And this is just goes on to show that the power of numbers. If I was just standing there myself, none of this would have happened. Because we have that many number of people with the right message, things happen. Politicians, I kind of feel like I don't need to talk about this with this particular audience, but there are a lot of people that think politicians are bad and they're corrupt, and therefore I don't want to discuss with them. That could be that's the worst mistake that you could do. Always work with politicians. And if you are really trying to bring change, you need to keep aside your own political ideology. I might be a BJP supporter or a Congress supporter, but if I want to be a citizen and I want to be somebody who want to bring change, I should be able to interact with whoever is currently in power or in opposition in a way that they have to respond. And this is the fundamental mistake that many of the citizen movements and RWAs and others do, where they become aligned with a particular ideology or party. Therefore, they lose broader support within their own community and things don't go anywhere. We continuously worked with the elected representatives. This is very common thing in mature democracies like the United States and other places, where people call up their legislators, they call up their congressmen and senators and demand certain things. So we started this process in Bengaluru. We give a particular time and recruit volunteers and publish all the phone numbers and say, call your MLA. So between 8 and 9 p.m., we start calling them. After a few calls, the MLAs will start saying, I already got 4 calls. I know what you want. I got it. Or, whatever they want to say. So we are putting pressure on them by making this kind of calls. And this is a very effective mechanism of making the political class understand the public opinion and actually interact with them. Otherwise, they think they are in some other glass house and we are separate from them and so on. By making this, normalizing the conversation, you're bringing political class into the decision making. We meet people, it's not just calls and social media, but physically meeting them, giving them respect, writing a letter. Nobody gives a written letter to corporators. They do to ministers and MPs and MLAs even, but corporators, they don't treat them with respect. So we started writing letters to them with their name, sign on them, give it to them personally. Now they feel good about being requested for help and support. And so they are going to convey that message to other party leaders and so on, and the message percolates in the political ecosystem. Demands. You heard steel flyover beda. You heard chukubuku beku. These are the demands that make people understand what we want to do. If we create a demand that says that increase citizen participation in governance, I think other than your own brother and spouse, everybody will run away because they don't even understand what it is that we're demanding. So we need to be able to articulate our vision, our demand in a way that they actually truly represent the change that we are seeking. And demand should also be based on the voices of the voiceless as well. Many of us that work on it are the privileged class. We should acknowledge that. We are only able to do this because we are not worried for where the next meal is coming from, where are we going to sleep in the night and so on. But there are many others that don't have that luxury, and yet they are the ones that are missing the equitable growth and development opportunities. So when you put these demands, you ensure that you hear the voices of the demand, you go to them. You don't expect everybody to come to your protest or your meeting, but you go to them, and that's how you represent the overall society. When you take the efforts to create a demand based on the voices of everybody, that also connects to the political class in a way that other demands won't. They will now know that this is a broad-based thing. And the demand needs to be very clear. Is it a legislative demand? Is it a rule? Is it a particular project? Things like that. And you should always understand who are the people that can act on it. Many times people keep tweeting Narendra Modi for a footpath problem or a pothole problem without any understanding that there is a local government, there's a state government, legislation, all these things. Somebody was talking about the cess and the how the budgets are allocated and so on. A lot of people just don't know that. We just released a video just last week after Srikanth and team's work on the Finance Commission, demystifying 15th Finance Commission. We're trying to make people understand how Finance Commission works. What does it do? People, for example, a lot of people think Finance Commission is a one of the ministries of central government. They don't realize that Finance Commission is like a CAG or the Election Commission. It's an independent body. Most people, even in the development sector, don't understand. So we want to create that sort of awareness, understanding, and then build a demand on top of it. When we put a demand, on the left-hand side, you see a demand that we made. It's called Bus Bhagya Beku. Bhagya means boon, give us this boon. Beku means give. You give us more buses, reduce the fares by half and double the number of buses. There are 6,000 buses. And when we do that, at the end of this campaign, look what the government has done. The government has cut the fares and added 6,000 fares. So sometimes it's in a strange and weird and funny way. The government is also trying to look at what it is that we need to do in this particular area. They want to support bus, but they may not know exactly what to do. By articulating a demand like this and gathering public support, you're also making things clear for the secretaries and IS officers and so on. So they also know how to make the decisions and what will satisfy the public needs. So I cannot stress the importance of articulating your demand in a simple way of making people understand, both the common man and media, especially media, and then those in the government. All of this is about communication, and the messages are something we all know that when a powerful messaging works, we've seen time and again in election campaigns, from Garibi Hatao or Abki Bar Modi Sarkar or any number of things. The reason they connect with people is because they touch an emotional chord. And these things don't need to be restricted only for election campaigns. They apply equally well for the civic campaigns and the public campaigns that people themselves initiate. So this is how you want to create your demand. And a lot of people mistake hashtag to messages. Hashtags are not messages. When you come up with the right message, that becomes a successful hashtag. You need to understand the order in which it goes. And it should evoke emotional connect to whoever that people that you're trying to attract. And the message, of course, doesn't come from nowhere. A message comes from a story. You want to fix the problem of traffic in Bengaluru. That is the story. You first understand the story of Bengaluru traffic. Why is the traffic so bad? What are the reasons contributing to the traffic congestion and pollution of Bengaluru? Then comes the solution. Why should somebody support my demand that flyover is bad and train is good? Because I'm explaining the story to them. I'm converting that into a message and a slogan. Only then you will get public support, and then they will show up on the street, and then the demand builds and the government will be forced to respond to that. So here is an interesting piece of message. This is the bus lane, a project that we demanded for years and years together. This is this road called Outer Ring Road. It's kind of like the IT belt of Bengaluru. If any of you are familiar with Bengaluru, this is Sarjapur, Bellandur, that road. 6 lakh people work on this road, most of them driving cars, therefore perennial traffic congestion everywhere in the city, not just here, but everywhere. I'll give you a statistic that will blow your mind. Many of these people sitting in the car, they enter a tech park which is behind these trees. These are huge parks with 10,000 employees, 20,000 employees. In the evening, when they go home, from the parking lot to the main road, it takes 1 hour to reach because so many cars are piled up. They're all trying to get onto that road to go home, but it takes that much time because there are so many piled up. So we introduced the bus lane. Bus lane is what? One lane is dedicated to the bus. Therefore, the bus can go faster. Immediately, those of us that understand mobility understand the power of it, but most people don't. So they started complaining. So then we created this kind of advertising or communication campaign. We marked the number of people that are sitting here. To carry the same 70 people, look how many vehicles are needed. So that much space is cleared by this person. Therefore, it deserves to be going fast. The people that made a decision to ditch their cars and two-wheelers deserve to go faster to the office. That incentivizes people to use the bus. And you take the bus and you're sitting in this car and stuck in traffic, you're watching this bus, you are more likely to take the bus once a week, twice a week, whatever. So when we created this kind of communication, the project was much more accepted by the public, and now it is running very well. Finally, on media, print media continues to be the most powerful mechanism to bring about change. If you want to change status quo in India, I sincerely believe that without the print media support, it is nearly impossible. Whatever it is that you want to do, if the print media doesn't take notice, doesn't communicate that, good or bad, they like it or they don't like it, but if they don't talk about it, it doesn't become a credible issue. Therefore, you need to create your story big enough that they will understand. Where does social media come in? Social media is very much important and needed, but it's still a way to find volunteers, find a way to get initial support. But if you want to make it into the mainstream media, mainstream political decision making, you need to get print media to support you. This is how the message works. You state the problem, you capture the anger, you create the solution, convey the hope, and then you offer a way of people to participate in creating the solution. For example, come on a Sunday morning to stand in the human chain so we can protect 8,000 trees, stop the steel flyover. Come on the train with us so we can raise the demand of the train. So that's easy for people to do. They don't need to go fight with anybody. They just come in on a Sunday morning, take the train, 1 hour, get on the train, get down, go home. Now you participated in demand creation, so therefore it will happen. So these are the kind of things that I want, the lessons that I've learned. Communicate, organize, and mobilize. If we do these things, you build curiosity. Why something is broken? What is wrong with status quo? How can you fix status quo? And then you create a bite-sized action. And don't tell people to boil the ocean and do a PhD, but actually, what can you do? Can you give half an hour to make 3 calls to 3 MLAs? Now that's a way I can connect to. And I don't need to do everything, and I don't need to be in front of the storm. People are afraid of doing this kind of activity. But if you are with a large number of people, you feel safe, you feel protected. So that's how you can do these things, and always include the political class in it. So there is a genuine debate, and then you come up with the grassroots level demands, and then you can bring action to this. I'm sorry I ran it through like a train because of the time constraints, but I hope I made sense to you. I'll be very happy to discuss this. I'm also eager to talk to you. There's another point of time, Srikanth talked about Janaagraha's work that we're doing. We created a forum called City right now on LinkedIn and Facebook. And that's a forum. I just saw another forum that is Vikalp posted on the chat. A very interesting forum. Similarly, we've created a forum called City Politics. I'll post the link on the chat window. Please do join that. The idea of City Politics is to bring citizens and politicians together. And so we can have informed decisions and good debates. And till now, we've conducted 10 events, webinars like this one, where we heard from politicians, experts, and civil society people and everyone like that. So that's my talk. Thanks.
Arjunji, can I take a couple of minutes just to round this off?
Yes, please do.
Sure, thanks, Srinu. So that was an elaboration on the importance of showing up, mobilizing, organizing, engaging. Elaboration of participatory governance. As Srinu was saying, there are several other initiatives that he himself has been part of both before and after he joined Janaagraha, particularly on ward committees, which are more systematic platforms of citizen engagement. So the message here is not really taking to the streets and protesting alone. That is one form of engagement, that is one form of participatory governance, but also through ward committees and platforms. Srinu mentioned city politics. There's also work that's happening with Slum Dwellers Association in Odisha and so on. So just a quick recap, and I just want to round this off and hand it back to Arjunji. So no silver bullet to breaking the status quo. In our view, from our experience, a three-pronged approach of strengthening administrative capacities in some ways from the inside by working primarily with the political executive and bureaucrats. Secondly, by engaging with political leaders who really matter today on urban political economy, because we know that in today's political economy in India, in today's context, political parties themselves are quite centralized, and therefore power is not distributed. Power is somewhat concentrated even within political parties. There are specific, not just elected leaders, but also unelected leaders who wield disproportionate share of power on how governance systems are designed, including those of our cities. That is second. And thirdly, the significance of nurturing participatory governance, which Srinu elucidated on. Now, the question is, therefore, what do we do now? Just want to call out 2 or 3 possible courses of action for each of us as individuals and organizations. One is recognize that the system is not going to fix itself. That what is required to break the status quo cannot come from within the system alone. There's a lot of push that is required from outside of the system, from academia, from civil society, from citizens. Second, in my view, the impulse for systemic change is still not strong enough in our cities. We need networks and alliances of individuals and institutions. We need networks and alliances which are both formal and informal, which can amplify this voice, which can amplify this desire for changing the status quo. And this is quite important because the inertia within the system is so strong that it requires disproportionate force from outside. And when I say, I'm using some of these words loosely, when I say force, I really don't mean, I mean constructive engagement, not aggressive confrontation. I also feel there is a need for catalytic agendas. And I'll call out 4 catalytic agendas which we are reflecting on quite deeply within Janaagraha. One is gender equality. Second is climate change. Third is water and sanitation. And fourth is public finance. And what I mean by catalytic agendas is those agendas that can bring diverse people together. Agendas which can unify politicians across levels, political parties, citizens, business, trade and industry, media, academia, and so on, where everybody agrees on the need for action. Everybody agrees that there is a problem and that requires solutions. So gender equality, climate change, water and sanitation, and public finance, agendas such as this may well be catalytic agendas. I called out 4. These could change with time and place. Not every city will have the same catalytic agendas, and not every city will have the same catalytic agendas over time. Lastly, strengthen the hands of the politicians. Srinu mentioned it. I won't emphasize on it, but I also can't underemphasize on the fact that politicians are a very important part of the solution. There is probably disproportionate share of power in today's ecosystem with administrators, with the political executive, and also a lot of our own time of civil society, academia, business goes in engaging with them, but not necessarily with politicians. In the medium to long term, systematic, irreversible, transformational change will come only if we work closely with politicians on some of these crucial agendas. I'll close here. Back to you, Arjun.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. And some of the final points which you really highlighted, recognize because the system cannot change, impulse, and also a catalytic agenda and strengthening political leaders. I really found the public finance part very interesting. So nonetheless, now I invite Tathagata sir to steer the panel discussion forward and invite our panelists for this deliberation.
Yes. Thanks a lot, Dr. Arjun. It's really a very fascinating talk by Mr. Srikanth and Mr. Srinivas. So, I mean, you really brought out the issues up close about, how everyday functioning of the city and how the relationship between the citizens and the people who run the city, the politicians and the bureaucrats, how they respond, the issues of public participation. That's really fantastic. So I think on this score, I'd like to invite Mr. Tikender Panwar, because he had also been a politician himself and has run a city. So it would be wonderful to listen to his views at this point.
Thank you, Dr. Tathagata. Can you hear me? Because I don't have an earphone, so I don't know whether the voice is clear or not.
Perfectly clear, sir. Perfectly
good. Yes.
Thank you so much. And it was so nice to hear Srikanth and, of course, Srinivas. And thank you, Srinivas, for such a wonderful presentation here. And thank you, IMPRI, for holding this very important webinar. I mean, why should we break the status quo? I mean, what is the need to break the status quo? I think, really, even to imagine this requires lots of imagination, yeah. So I think very pertinent. So what I'm going to do is, because whatever I've heard from Srikanth and Srinivas, I am virtually in tandem to that. I support what they've said. But I think there are 3-4 more elements that I view it from the perspective of one who has represented the city, or maybe served the city for 5 years, being the directly elected deputy mayor, and why it is why the inertia, as Srikanth pointed out, is so strong that in dialectical philosophy, we always used to say that it's the internal contradiction that is the driving force. But of course, external is important. But I think here, external is very important. I mean, something if that push, what Srikanth was mentioning about, doesn't happen. And I think those 4 catalytic agendas. I'll come to all that. By the way, Dr. Dattagata, how much time can I speak? Maybe 5 minutes?
Maybe about 10 minutes.
Oh, 10 is fine. So I thought it would be fine.
So 5 minutes, then we can come back again.
Great.
Another.
Yeah, Doctor. So, but I think what is also important for us to realize, and especially this is what I came to know while being in the city, actually, that who runs the city, and if that status quo we do not really discuss, or we do not engage with that with that question, I think then one of the important elements we are missing. And this whole business of the city being run either by parastatals or large tech giants, and especially after the call and the investments that is taking place in artificial intelligence, we maybe in due course of time, and as we have seen the bandwagon for smart cities, which has already diminished the role of the elected city council and given more powers to the special purpose vehicles, that entire driving force. So I think that is something which in the Indian context we must revisit, and actually we have to engage to break that status quo. So what does that mean? I think that according to me, it means that we have to go back to the basics, what John Claus has been saying since Habitat 3 and before that in Habitat 2, where Habitat 2 focused more about revolution. I mean, I remember Kirti Bhai speaking about, and of course UN speaks revolution in a different context, but nevertheless we should not miss that word when he said revolution. I think what revolution to UN is parallel to what Srikanth is saying, breaking this inertia, according to me, I think, if I have to draw that parallel there. So I think when I say go back to the basics, I think one of the important elements is that understanding cities, and if I have to understand that we have to break the status quo, understanding the cities as engines of growth, understanding cities as city entrepreneurs, so considering the city as an entrepreneurs, we have to break that status quo. Because cities are not just meant for accumulation of wealth and accumulation of capital. Unfortunately, that is how largely in a larger, broader or meta context, the cities are being viewed. And I've mentioned it several times, but I would still again like to state, and that's a fantastic work by Samuel Stein called The Capital City, where actually the real estate state actually captures the city imagination, the city planners. Those city planners are not corrupt that way. So, the entire context of city planning is actually linked to that accumulation of capital. So how do we actually, I don't mind the accumulation process being further enhanced in the cities, but how do we democratize that back? I think, according to me, if that status quo has to be, I think that is what we are missing in the present discussion. I mean, this whole process of city development, city building, and this accumulation of massive capital, phenomenal capital that is taking place from cities, and contributing to some 70% of GDP, 90% of revenues coming from. But is it getting democratized back to the people? I think what tools, what processes do we have to work? And Srinivas, you were excellent. I mean, when you said why BRT is required, all that to me is that process of democratizing the surplus that gets generated. So how do we democratize that surplus? I mean, I don't mind the surplus getting accumulated, but how do we democratize that? What are the tools? I think that engagement is required. The second thing, which according to me is important, is about the whole process of city development, city building, especially in the present political environment, where more and more ghettoization is taking place. I mean, if you come to Delhi, especially Northeast Delhi, after the riots that took place last year, and I had these students from SPA where I was I had the final year students, the two groups that I was a guide to them. And one of the groups had to do a study on, the ghettoization, especially in the context of religion. I mean, it's bizarre. I mean, it's so, how do you break this? I mean, if ghettoization, the way and the manner we have witnessed in Gujarat towns, if that manner and the same way it continues in in other parts of course, we find ghettoization in the form of the rich and the elite, and I mean the poor and the marginalized. But the ghettoization, the form in which we are witnessing, especially in the context of religion, I think it's really it's not inclusive at all at all. So Dr. Dattagata, I mean, we actually have to visualize, and we have to engage with this entire process. Would certain colonies would be just termed as Muslim, as Hindus, and I'm afraid we don't discuss these in the urban context. I mean, we kind of more are concerned about issues like waters, and then water sanitation are important. Of course, housing is very important, but I think that's the second thing. The third thing, and to which I think Srinivas and Srikanth have fabulously addressed, but I would still like to mention, is the whole process of alienation of the citizens from the entire process of city development. And according to me, I think one of the tools, because there where I can really make a point, maybe in the first and the second, I do not have solutions and answers to it to speak about. And that is the concept of ward sabhas and ward committees that were being pointed out. I mean, if the cities, so who plans? Take, for example, Delhi. It's a Delhi Development Authority. The Delhi Development Authority gives a damn to citizens' voices, and the kind of TODs are now. Karkat Duma is a new TOD that is coming up. So all these TODs are coming up. People are not even aware about it. How many trees. I mean, I'll come to those catalytic tools that Srikanth was mentioning about. But I think this whole question of inclusivity, the whole question of owning your city, and owning your city means, I mean, it doesn't come from a hypothetical notion, that why people don't believe in such a notion, because actually they're not made to believe, because the cities are being planned by some exclusive, pockets which give a damn to either the citizens or so they address some other. So I think this whole, how do we address this alienation? I think ward sabhas, ward committees. Why can't we go back to the ward sabhas, ward committees as far as city planning is concerned, and then give those professional inputs whatever are required? Else, it will be a very difficult question. And then governance. And the fourth point, which I would like to, is the whole process of governance. And of course, it is linked to the process of alienation. Why governance? Because it's very important. And governance, as I think Srikanth, you pointed out, if I have missed, or maybe Srinivas, and governance doesn't mean just the elected councillors, though Srinivas and Srikanth laid too much emphasis on the political class. I come from that class, by the way, Srikanth. I know how corrupt they are, and corrupt they are means not all of them, but can you believe, to contest an election for the councillors, the big parties, they spend almost 1 CR to 2 CR in a ward. Srinivas, this is absurd. How can you expect? And
it's 10 in Bangalore, 10.
My God. So yeah, I come from a mountain town, so maybe we are still catching up. So what does that mean? So, and I think ward committees, ward sabhas, some kind of transparency, answerability could be one of the tools where we engage with this entire process. We still don't engage with the process of elections. So elections we've kept, okay, some political. No, we have to be the political class. Why not the common people? Why not the common people like you who were able to set the agendas for the municipality? Why not for the elections? So I think this governance model, and unfortunately, the status quo gets further consolidated for further alienation in the form of, smart cities, in the form of special purpose vehicles, where even the city councils are, even if they pay money, even if they spend money and get elected, at least they're answerable, no? They are answerable to the people. They have to go back to the people. But the SPV model is not answerable at all. So I think that is also, I just want to raise, that issue. And to the four tools, perfect. I think gender is something, absolutely important if we have to understand. And then climate change, that was suggested. I think that's very important. Public finance, definitely, because and I think also about the working people. Because we don't speak in class terms in the cities, and we have not. Maybe I missed that, But I think it's very important, the kind of paradigm shift that has taken place in the last 30 or 40 years. The organized sector, which was almost maybe 75% unorganized and 25% organized, has actually now moved to the huge kind of the point is the huge kind of informality that has creeped in, 94%. So if 94% informal sector is there and most of it's unorganized, then what do you expect out of that? I mean, what are we talking about? And I think, Srinivas, you rightly pointed out, I mean, our groups, our citizens groups, they're very important, but they shouldn't remain to, certain sections of the middle classes. And so, I mean, what would be the engagement? Earlier, we remember, you had the large textile mills. So you had the working people strike and also reclaiming their spaces. Now, this informal sector hardly reclaims its space. I mean, maybe, so if that status quo has to be broken, I mean, what is it that is required? I mean, I have seen some of the groups organizing, mobilizing people in Delhi, especially the Zomatos, and these. I mean, they're a large section. I mean, lakhs and lakhs who are kind of employed in that. So how do we actually? The question of reclaiming urban spaces with the context of informal sector. And lastly, why do we not put in question of housing here, Srikanth? I mean, you listed 4. Why not? Housing is such an important element. And we have seen how, and actually the pandemic has exposed us badly. One of the reasons that people went back is, of course, informality, and of course, the assets, the asset holding capacity of the people, and also loss of jobs. But I think second major issue was they didn't have houses, they didn't have money to pay rent, and there were no labor hostels, there were no rental housing, nothing of the sort. So I think we have to really rethink, and we have those data. I mean, that data which is screaming day in and day out, that public housing has fallen from almost 6% to 3%. I mean, rest comes from. And I just day before, last week, not day before, but last Sunday, I had gone to meet a friend in Noida, and they're completely empty houses, especially the block that was constructed by JP. So I mean, how do we really understand this issue? So you claim spaces, urban spaces at a cheaper price, then housing becomes a problem, where almost 70-80% houses have not even been occupied. So I think housing has to be an important catalyst if we, I mean, of course, in economic terms. I think that maybe Arjun later. So I think those were the immediate that I could make out. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Tikenderji. I mean, you have very nicely articulated that the issue of public participation, it's a very nuanced issue. And I mean, within the public participation, there are different groups who may not be able to access the public in a similar way. I mean, the Indian cities are becoming more and more divided between the rich and the poor, and a very high rise in the about the urban informality and the issues of gender. Yes, of course. I mean, these are critically important and not usually discussed in the context of public participation, which is somewhat, I mean, often seen as a urban middle class activity. But I mean, there are issues of class involved here. That's absolutely very essential. So I think at this core, I can request Dr. Lajita Kamath to put forward her views.
Thanks so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. First of all, thank you so much for organizing the webinar on such an important topic. And both presentations, I think, were really thought-provoking. So thank you so much for that. I'm going to respond largely directed to the presentations, but also building off from what Tikender has already said. And can I say, Tikender, that it's great to follow you, because You say most things and say them so articulately that it makes the job much easier for the ones who follow. So, I mean, I have a couple of points, in fact, to both the presenters, and really sort of trying to also stimulate a larger conversation on some of these issues. So the first thing is, I'm going to start with you, Srikanth. I think one of the interesting things that you mentioned to me when you highlighted your three broad instruments, and I actually agree with all of them. What I found interesting, and let me begin with your second one, when you talked about engage political leaders on urban political economy. And in fact, I was actually thinking as I was listening to you present that in some ways, there are actually very strong and deep political economy interests that actually stop cities from, in fact, becoming more empowered, from greater capacity being built at city level, from building stronger, say, gender equality, even among, for example, women corporators, vis-a-vis other corporators, and vis-a-vis state level and other political leaders. So I think what would be interesting for me to learn more from you is if you can actually, sort of pivot your entire question and think about what are the strong, very deeply vested political economic interests that actually stop the status quo from being broken. And as a sort of connection to that, my second point is really that we have so many agencies operating in the city. Some of them are, of course, the urban local government. Then you also have a host of different kinds of parastatals and special purpose vehicles and state departments. So in many ways, I really agree with the point that you make about strengthening capacities, administrative capacities at all levels. Because even if we look just at the area of the city, the jurisdiction of the city itself, you need to work with all these different agencies. There's no point only focusing on the urban local government because its mandate and its brief is narrow. And it needs, for so many different domains, it needs to work with other agencies. So just if we look at the city scale, I'm not even talking about higher levels, we need to look at multiple levels of building capacity. But what's also needed, and here is where I very much echo Tikender's presentation about who runs the city. The question has to be also that while capacities of all need to be built, we also need to think about one agency that has some legitimate authority then for running the city. And that I think is really crucial here. So it brings me back to so many decades of debate and discussion and action, in fact, also on the 74th Constitutional Amendment. And I find it interesting that it didn't feature at all in your presentation. Now, I'm not, and that we can, in fact, maybe talk about later. So what I'm really interested in is where does that feature here, but more from the point of view of this one legitimate authority that can be said to rule or to run the city, which doesn't rule out the city government from coordinating and collaborating with other agencies, but there needs to be one legitimate authority. And I'm constantly using the word legitimate authority here because we all, I think, are agreed that we are in a democracy. We want our democracy to continue. So it needs to also be a democratically elected body. So that is something, so I think that is kind of the second point that I wanted to sort of push a little bit. The third point that I wanted to bring up was, and I'm saying this third, but probably it's possibly the most important. And this is, in fact, I think also echoing Tikender. It's really the issue of commodification of land, the real estateization of our cities, the financialization of our cities, which is then very deeply connected to the issue you raised, which is a very important one, that today all urban discourse is centered on urban infrastructure. And the entire imagination is about infrastructure and typically big ticket items. So this is also very interesting. Nowadays, people are not talking anymore about what we used to work on in the 90s as basic services. It's all about large infrastructure projects. And it's interesting, I think that Srinivas, your presentation also focused on the first project was very much about a big ticket item. many times, in fact, there's huge resistance to these, but that there are also huge, in some ways, pushbacks to this resistance. So it was so inspiring to hear the story of the steel flyover and the steel flyover Beda campaign, which it was really fantastic. But in some ways, I think maybe what I would really like to hear from you, maybe in our future presentations, is if you actually picked a case of failure and talk about why did a project fail despite, you know, the very considerable mobilizational efforts and agitations, and then the collaboration with different players, including members within the system, right? So then despite all of that, why do also failures occur? And maybe then we can think more, I think, about the conditions under which some projects can work and some projects don't. Maybe it needs to really, maybe we need to think in some ways of a conjuncture here, that multiple kinds of conditions or factors or forces need to in fact be involved. And sometimes, or in fact many times, public participation, despite being extremely strong, despite being broad-based, sometimes cannot work. And so I think this question we need to pull out, but we will be able to understand it better if we really think then about issues of, as I said before, land commodification, about financialization, and how these are very strongly connected to then large infrastructure projects and the very considerable backing that these get, not just from senior politicians, senior bureaucrats, but also from you know, big corporations. And many of these, in fact, are transnational, but then have domestic, very strong domestic branches or subsidiaries. So I think that's kind of the third thing, and this is the last thing I wanted to actually talk about, both with Srikanth and Srinivas's presentations, which in some ways come through in both. And you particularly, Srikanth, highlighted towards the end of your presentation when you were talking about sort of catalytic processes for change. You talked about, you know, everyone agrees we need to build consensus, we need to build agreement, broad-based agreement. And I think it really brought to mind, I've done a lot of work on participation, and some very critical writing on participation has come out, particularly post the 2000s. In fact, one titled it, one of the books that I'm referring to is an edited volume called Participation, the New Tyranny. And what they actually talk about is, and many others, they talk about this idea of a harmony model of power. And I think some of what you were talking about in terms of building consensus and building agreement is very much this. It doesn't actually think about power as something that is very asymmetrical. So in fact, there are very strong differentials here. People are not equal, and you know, certain communities, poorer groups, marginalized groups, many citizen groups are not at the table when big decisions are being made. And so how do you then, without conflict, how is it possible then to redistribute or redress this imbalance? So I think that is a major issue. And I think conflict in that sense needs to be talked about very, very strongly if we actually are to talk about substantive participation. And this goes on then into Srinivas's presentation, which as I said, I think the projects that you talked about were fantastic, very inspiring. You know, and I'd love to sort of learn more and encourage my students and so many others to learn from that experience. But again, one of the things that I'm thinking about is that when we think about these particular projects, that some of them that you talked about, they seem to depend in some ways on a certain, you know, certain people who matter need to be part of them. Media needs to be important. Now, I think we are only reading today about media being also not just compromised, but in the sense they are also part of this entire, you know, consortium of, you know, corporations who are then closely, you know, in league with other, you know, people who have a big stake in running the city in a particular way. So I think if media is to take or to pay attention, then projects and campaigns need to look a certain way, right? So that's something that I'm really, you know, thinking a lot about, that how do you build in some sense common cause when we have very, very unequal cities, when inequality is actually increasing, not decreasing. So how do you, think about those kinds of issues, and how, so what happens? Or is it that only some issues get taken up and others less so? And so what do we do about those issues that maybe the media wouldn't be interested in picking up? So I think that those kinds of questions, I think we need to talk a little bit more about. And I think the final thing that I want to just say, again, in this vein of participation, Srikanth, you highlighted a couple of areas that you think that Janaagraha is working in strongly. One of them, I think you mentioned, was climate change. And so I think there's been, again, some recent work. It was a very interesting area to maybe really for us to think about in terms of also citizen participation. It's really an area in some ways which is a big leveler, that you actually have, flooding in that sense is going to affect all of us. Of course, unevenly, but at least it's something that will affect all of us. So if, for example, fishermen in Ennore Creek, in a big campaign that's ongoing in Chennai, if communities are not, if the city itself is not bothered very much because, Ennore is in North Chennai, which is it's a poorer part, it's a more industrialized part. I can say the same thing for areas in Mumbai. Many other middle-class citizens are less concerned because they don't live in those areas. They don't see that kind of pollution. They don't understand the consequences of that. But if you actually recast the argument then to be one of something related to rising seas, then maybe, so then how do you then create then a campaign which brings together, for example, fishermen and middle-class groups as well? And so that could be one very interesting space. So here, maybe the kind of areas to push would be, and this is just something I'm working on, so I'm just throwing it out there for the rest of the discussion, is that, so I'm working with a coastal community, a fishing community in Mumbai, in the Thane Creek. And one of the things that I found through the work there is that in the steel flyover case, which in fact I was following, a lot of middle-class groups were very, very strong in their protests because in many ways, trees mean a lot to people. And so it was, I think, quite successful the way that people thought of trees and what they mean for you and what they give you. And it's not just the instrumental kind of use for it, but even your own memories of the beauty or the tree that you loved when you were growing up, or of a religious nature or a sacred nature of trees. So I found that where trees were concerned, people were a lot more willing. So like in the RE campaign in Mumbai, a lot more people were willing to go and participate. But with the fisher community I'm working with, one of the major issues is actually pollution of the sea. And it's really shocking, but it's something like, I think about 80 or almost 85% of Mumbai's sewage is released virtually untreated into the ocean. And it's something that we don't see, and therefore people both don't know about it and maybe care less about it. So I think it's also about, visibilizing particular issues and understanding and making those kind of linkages. For that, I think all that you mentioned in terms of building curiosity, building awareness, creating a story, building a campaign, broad basing it, working with all of those really work. So I wanted to end on a more positive, hopeful note, and hopefully I've done that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lalitha ji, for highlighting these issues of asymmetries of power in a city. You also, reinforce the point that was brought out by Tikender ji, that the participation is a very loaded issue, and everybody cannot participate on equal terms. And the cities are becoming more and more conflictual in terms of the people, and also the different interest groups, and also the very important issue of financialization of the cities and growing convergence of interests between the big leaders and the big corporates and the big media, which together has got tremendous power over the city. And I think, I think at this point I can request Dr. Shubhagato Dasgupta to share his views.
Thank you, Dr. Chatterjee. Thanks, Srikanth. Thanks, Srinivas. That was very exciting and, as always, very energetic. So I'm delighted to be part of this, and I'm thoroughly enjoying the discussion that seems to be emerging from those thought-provoking presentations. I'll keep my comments short because much has been said. Both the presentations actually look at the status quo in a particular manner and very strategically and tactically figure out some solutions that might be pushing the horizon. So a lot of that is very has some really good lessons for everyday processes that one could engage in as citizens, as the wider academia, etc., as other stakeholders to the city. I would just take two, maybe three different perspectives into this debate. One is looking at why what really is the fear of looking at differentiation and divergence to create new opportunities for social change, right? So much of the participation that Lalita just talked about is phrased in this characterism that it kind of looks more orderly and allows for more orderly development. But historically, in terms of longer term processes, sometimes most often it has been these larger differentiation that leads to more equity. So one to do keep that in a frame of analysis. The second point is about maybe I guess the only other point to add here is that I too support Tikender and Lalita in kind of articulating that the key process means in breaking the status quo, the key process is recentering the city, yeah, with principles that kind of allow local actors to have a greater say in city processes. The wider political economy, and as India's decentralization kind of came up in a regime which was already neoliberal by then, it has led to a set of fragmentation which did not possibly lead to the outcomes that that, let's say, decentralization, if it was done 20 years earlier, would have had under a state planning regime, right? So there are these longer term processes which challenge each other as we take these tasks forward. So I would request you to kind of reflect on how the centrality of all these strategies and tactics kind of lead to greater differentiation versus convergence to create incentives for change on one side, and second, to recenter the city. So how do citizens therefore get more centrality in decision making around the city, and how does that is there a ripple effect of that? Are these examples going to help us create the momentum that's needed across cities? Because much of this change will have to be driven at senior levels of government. So whether the momentum can lead to those kinds of outcomes of recentering the ownership of the city, like the other speaker said. I'll just leave it here, Dr. Chatterjee.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dr. You really talked a very interesting aspect about recentering the city, and how about the senior leadership, administrative leadership can shape the things in the city, and how to restructure the city processes. I think at this point, it would be nice to have Mr. Samir Unhale, who is in the thick of the things, being the administrator himself and running in a very important state of Maharashtra. I think Mr. Unhali, the floor is yours.
Yeah, hello.
Yes, sir.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes,
Yeah.
audible. Yes.
Thank you very much. First of all, inviting someone who's into clerkdom to address these issues. It just gives a different perspective from the day-to-day working that we are into, and this, I think, different perspective is of great importance. Or we all tend to see city from the specific role that we play, maybe as an academician, maybe as an activist, maybe as a politician, maybe as a administrator, and we tend to have our own perception as to what the city realities are, and they need not actually match with each other. So I think that's one point I always felt, because very often morning we are onto demolition drives and evening we are trying to resettle them. So the way Indian cities are moving, I personally feel that they are moving at tremendous speed. So in a bit the status quo or the word status quo was trying to think on it actually, as to how we could really think of status quo is when city is changing at such a fast speed. I mean, the way things are moving, even in our day-to-day views that we have 10 years, 20 years before, what Delhi and Mumbai was, now they are tremendously different. So probably in that particular way, things are changing. But the larger issues that we feel, the specific issue of participation, I always felt that the political participation need not be the only focus of engaging a citizen with his city. It is of course important, but the way political voting person, if you look at, even once in 5 years, maybe the voting percentage is not more than 40 to 50% or 55%. And if you take this to the total ratio of the population, it's even one third. So probably when we are talking of engaging the citizens with the city, political participation is of course important. No one can deny that. But the totality of engagement of citizen need not be, look only from this particular dimension of, the political participation. Very often when we see, in fact, Janaagraha's work has been, I'm following it very with interest, and we do interact with them quite often in and various other policy level agencies also. So the larger issue, I always feel that that the poorest of the poor and weakest of the weak, how can they influence the running of the city that would take care of inclusion, which I think would be very, very important. Because the populations have grown so much, and I sometimes doubt whether the traditional institutions and the traditional methods are sufficient to take care of all the concerns and anxieties that common people are feeling. I think the quantitative changes are becoming so much that probably we will have to rethink, as to how we can. And I think that's where I believe the technology part comes up. I think Janaagraha was one of the important players as far as the Swachh Bharat was concerned on the app that they gave, the Swachh Bharat app, and I think it did created a lot of impact. And I do look at technology as one of the players, one of the factors which could help a citizen connect with its citizen in various aspects, even political or non-political, because the patterns of interactions, if we live in, say, Delhi, Mumbai, or the mega cities, it is sometimes very confusing how to what 2 million people are actually doing in that place, if you really look at it, or 20 million people are doing in that particular locations. So I feel, I would rely more on technology, maybe on IT. The various citizen apps. I was working earlier at CEO Thane Smart City, and we had prepared a citizen app, the city app actually, an app called DigiThane. It was of course inspired from what was done at Tel Aviv, but it now has almost 2.5 lakh registered users out of a city of maybe 5 lakh families. And the engagements that we had during COVID times was almost 40 million. So what I feel that, I'm sorry, I'm traveling right now, so I cannot start my mobile because I am still in traveling. So what the 2 points I would like to really share is the deliberations were fantastic. It was extremely, enriching to learn the various thoughts and ideas of all the discussants and also the two our friends from Janaagraha. But I now feel that now we will have to find out new ways of allowing citizens to engage with the city. Probably there is an emotional connect. Probably there is a cultural rule to that. Probably issues of inclusion will of course be important. But we will have to find out a new way of engaging with the city. You can call it participation in these decades of the shall we say 21st century. The old traditional methods that we are using to analyze, to comprehend, to decide are falling short, and we require. That's I think that's where I feel that policy and academicians have a major role to play, and probably we will have to find thinkers of our own century rather than just depending on what was done, which of course is important, but I somehow feel is now not sufficient. We require a major quantum jump in the way of how city and citizens need to engage with each other on various dimensions, politically as well as maybe non-politically or culturally and all other aspects that we have. So it was a very limited point that I had. I was enjoying the listening to all the discussions that we had. So as I'm traveling, probably I don't know if my network is fine. So I will stop at this, and I'm of course following, and I will join if there is any specific issue that we have to discuss. So thank you, thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Unhale, for your views. I think at this point, we need to return back to Mr. Srikanth and Mr. Srinivas to share their views, and respond to some of the very pertinent issues being raised. I think maybe we can start with Mr. Srinivas.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. It has been very enlightening to listen to all the views of the esteemed panelists, and I'm also very lucky to be working with Dr. Shubhagato, Dasgupta in Odisha, Jaga Mission project. It's always a great learning experience to be in the meetings with him and share, understand his views. And we are working on something very, very interesting and hopefully a future topic of discussion here. The more I hear about different sections of society and the voiceless and the media and so on, I feel like we need to have a conversation on the slum associations and how the fourth tier of governance is taking shape in Odisha. Something phenomenal, fantastic is happening that media and mainstream people are not likely going to be talking about or celebrating, but we must. And I request the organizers to consider doing that, and I'm sure Dr. Shubhagato will be very happy to come back and talk about that, and we will be too. A very quick response to Dr. Lalita Kamath on the 74th Amendment. I come from a school that, I'm really tired of hearing the 74th Amendment. I think we should stop using that word, and we should start using words like ward committee, and making things happen for the citizens and corporators and mayor. Because, pardon me for saying this, but for the most part, 74th Amendment has failed. It has failed to inspire our citizens or cities or improve the governance of city. My hometown, Visakhapatnam in Andhra Pradesh, is having elections for the city corporation after 14 years. Bengaluru city has no council in the last 6 months. So if you can't even hold elections, can you imagine doing that for a state assembly or parliament for months and years together? But that is still happening. That itself conveys to me the inherent weaknesses in the law, and therefore we must move beyond that and try to talk in terms of what we need. If we want to discuss 74th Amendment, that's good, but we should talk about it in terms of what is missing there and how we are going to fix that, rather than trying to get 74th going any further. And that's entirely my personal opinion. And also, I think that if you want to get more and more people participate, we should talk more in the language of what people understand and want to participate, rather than the language of the legislation. that very few of us understand. We need both, obviously, but depends on what your objective is. So we are beginning to think that the problem of urban governance is not so much about lack of solutions. I think all of us, any of us in this room, and some of you in this room are really experts at it, and you know how to fix it. Absolutely, yes. The issue is not that. The issue is the popular support for such transformative ideas. And I think for some time, at least, we should focus on how do you get the mainstream to fall behind this kind of campaigns. And that is why big ticket projects get attention from public. And went from steel flyover to suburban train to ward committees is exactly that, because ward committee is horizontal. It's about basics. It's about everyday governance. But the number of people that participate in ward committees is a fraction of people that will come to stop the flyover or demand the suburban train. We should accept the reality of both, but try to strengthen the ward committees by creating that also. If we started with ward committees, nobody would have come. Because of the steel flyover and the suburban train, we gathered a whole bunch of volunteers and energy, and that translated into support for ward committees. You need a market for reform. Pardon to use that word, but you create that market by highlighting the gaps in the urban governance. I think that's an approach that is giving us some dividends. So I don't think it's a final answer. We still have to see how things go. But I'm once again grateful for giving me this opportunity to speak to all of you, and look forward to being in touch with you. Thank you.
I think, thank you, Mr. Srinivas, for your putting forward your views and also sharing thoughts about the Jaga mission in Odisha. Yes, Jaga mission is really a very transformative thing that's going on in Odisha, and that's not very much talked about outside the state. So we can definitely have a conversation on this issue. I think I can request Mr. Srikanth to share his views.
I think wonderful, very incisive and sharp interventions by all the speakers before. Tikenderji, Dr. Kamath, Shubhagato, and Mr. Unale. Thanks for that. Quick responses or reflections would be more appropriate. On the political economy interests, Dr. Kamath mentioned, very true. We don't think it's going to be an easy journey at all. I, for one, believe there's a need to very cleverly navigate the political economy ecosystem in very real terms. And for that, instead of what the ideal state that we would like to see, we should begin by starkly admitting the current realities of power equations within the political system, particularly between the state government and the city, and also within corresponding political party structures, and also in terms of the power equations with the bureaucrats. Because I'm at least, I haven't done any empirical research on it, but having met with maybe about 14 or 16 states at senior levels of the bureaucracy, and in some of those cases, maybe half a dozen cases, the political executive, I actually feel that the political executive is far more comfortable with the state level bureaucracy than they are with the counterparts of the city level. So in many states, Telangana being a recent case, the state government, which had an overwhelming majority, somewhat a brute majority in the assembly, and this is not, I'm taking Telangana as an example, it has happened in several other states, has passed a hugely centralizing legislation at the state level, whereby bureaucrats can dismiss elected governments at the city and so on. Now, and we are seeing this in many, many states, because as Dr. Kamath alluded to this, that the current, what is in fashion, or what appears to be being read as an electable course of action, a re-electable course of action, appears to be, one is a focus on large infrastructure, and the other is direct targeted service delivery. And so chief ministers are working with their chosen bureaucrats, and they're very comfortable in doing that, because nobody is coming in the way. Messy democracy is not coming in the way of, orderly delivery, which appears to be giving them dividends. And the way I'm seeing it, it is across party lines. BJP, Congress, and regional parties have all adopted this quite successfully in different at different state governments. So I agree that it's messy. I agree it will take time, but I think we need to starkly admit the power equations of today, cleverly navigate and influence them to get the outcome that we want. I do believe that in the midst of all this, given that politicians have very clear incentives, which are not hidden at all, it actually helps. The fact that they are unabashedly clear about their priorities and their own incentives, and people are also clear on that. A few examples that hold out hope for me. One is that in several states we've seen fairly radical devolution of powers and functions. I don't want to overstate this, but relatively speaking, fairly radical devolution to smaller cities and towns, including political devolution. So there appears to be a trend there. I'll elaborate on that while addressing the point on financialization. And this has happened in Maharashtra. This has happened in the Hindi heartland, in many states where mayors are directly elected, where a devolution, both political and financial, are relatively more radical than we otherwise see. Similarly, the announcement in Odisha before the last assembly elections of reserving 1/3 by a political party, not by law, reserving 1/3 of the seats for women. That I thought was fairly progressive, and also held out hope that could be actually a hook for several more such reforms. Similarly, on self-help groups across Kudumbashri in Kerala, the SHG movement in Odisha, and perhaps in other states as well. I was reading recently, I don't know how effective it is, but I was reading recently that Bengal has also done something towards that. But we do know that Kudumbashri is probably the oldest and most systematic. Began for skilling the urban poor women, etc. Began as a urban poor collective of women. But when Mr. Vijayanand was there on one of the panels that Srinu and I had put together in early January, he was mentioning that both political parties are making a beeline to Kudumbashri members to have them as candidates for local body elections. And I also heard both with Mr. Vijayanand and few others in Kerala that after 20-25 years, the Sarpanchpati phenomenon is giving way to real political empowerment of women in Kerala. Of course, we need to study this in greater detail. I'm hoping that we invest some of our own energies in Janaagraha next year. But it will be certainly useful to have academia who can do a much better job than we can in a rigorous kind of way of studying models like this. But that held out a lot of hope. The fact that it does take 20-25 years for this cycle to actually play out and for women to start playing a very impactful role. And I believe that for me, if there is one magic bullet as far as demand side political economy is concerned, I did address the supply side political economy for a bit, but as far as demand side political economy is concerned, it is between 1/3 and half reservation for women in city councils in India. It is not going to go away anytime soon, and we can use it to our advantage. When I say to our advantage, I don't mean to come across as if it's just an instrumental provision. It certainly can lead to meaningful gender equality, but also a variety of areas. It can impact mobility, it can impact climate change, it can impact water and sanitation, if only we strengthen the hands of between these 1/3 and half elected women councillors. And I believe it's going to be much easier for us in cities to get over the Sarpanchpati phenomenon. That gives me a lot of hope in some sense. On why didn't we bring up 74th CA and the recentering point that Shubhagato brought up, I really think that it's actually a consequence of the political economy. And I don't think that we would essentially, like Srinu mentioned, we would be flogging a dead horse. I think we should use 74th Amendment that as an entry point for greater reforms, rather than as something that gives us hope. Because politicians are also looking for new narratives. They're looking to do something new. They want to do something big bang, radical, etc. So we may need a new narrative. That is one side of the 74th. The second I want to say is I feel that devolution, decentralization itself, or recentering of the city is actually caught up, is a captive of political economy, is a hostage of political economy, and we need to release it. So the how of it is what we are positioning as political economy and nurturing participatory governance, etc. One other point that I want to make is, I think we have ignored municipal laws at the cost of the 74th Amendment. We over-focus on the 74th Amendment and under-focus on municipal laws. I think they are actually ghastly. Between the Town and Country Planning Acts and the municipal laws, our constitution writers or makers would turn in their graves. They're so poorly drafted. They're so inchoate and incoherent, incomplete, and they hardly get amended or discussed in assemblies. Srinu and I were working a few months ago on a new BBMP bill, and it's unimaginable that one of the largest cities in the world, India's third largest city, would implement a law like that without any discussion whatsoever in the assembly. It's unimaginable that that's happening in India. So it'll be good to refocus on the municipal law as an instrument of change more than the 74th Amendment. It also narrows the focus for us, gives us a set of 20, 30 political actors to work with, etc. On the point on financialization and real estate, and I am sensitive to time, so I'll close quickly. I think what may be useful, and I'm just thinking aloud, is to look at the spatial pattern of urbanization and also the unique urbanization pattern in India, where we have few large cities and we have a long tail of smaller cities. So perhaps it is useful for us to focus on the relatively smaller cities and towns for us to catalyze urban change in India. I don't believe we should grapple with a Mumbai or a Gurugram as the starting point for urban change, because I think the part on the vested interests of land, of real estate, of the nexus between real estate and politicians, etc., is a little too deep, and therefore our energies may be better spent in the next tier of cities. And we are trying to again, an area that we'd love to collaborate with academia is, we realize that if you look at the pattern, it's like a large head, a thin body, and a long tail. If you had to draw urbanization in India as a picture, you have 4 million plus, 8 cities of 4 million plus. You have another 37 cities which are a million plus. You have another close to 50 cities which are 500,000 plus, and then you have 4,000 cities which are less than 100,000. Which are less than 500,000, right? Of which only 500 are between 100,000 to 500,000. So basically, you have a long tail of really small cities. So we should cleverly pick the kind of cities where we think there is a good mix of citizen demand, which are growing, which are probably in the range of say 200 to 500, 600,000 or so. The Mangalurus, the Hubli Dharwads, the Trivandrums, and equivalent, the Raipurs and Ranchis and stuff like that, rather than look at the really large cities. That may be useful. That may make it easier for us to also surmount the challenge of financialization, relatively speaking. The other interesting, when I spoke about Raipur and Ranchi, one thing just struck me, and the conversation on large urban infra. One of the commissioners that we were working with in Chhattisgarh mentioned that even politicians are actually really scared to touch large urban infra projects within 2 years of re-election, because execution capacity of Indian cities is so bad and so miserable that they are saying that citizens are not going to remember the 20 years of benefits that they will get from those projects, but when they are voting, they will remember that their roads were done. They will remember the nightmare that they had to undergo when sewerage pipelines were being laid, or water pipelines were being laid, or when metro lines were being constructed. So they were essentially saying that nobody wants to touch these projects for up to 2 years. That's the intersection in some ways of political economy and administrative capacities. The last part on substantive participation and climate change being the great leveler, absolutely agree. I think between climate change, following the money, and gender equality, I feel if I had to pick among those, I would pick gender equality and climate change as two somewhat interrelated areas which will appeal to politicians, which can bring all the stakeholders together on the same page, where it's a win-win, maybe for different reasons, but it could be a win-win to force the hand of state level politicians and state level bureaucrats to see decentralization and devolution not as some ideological end goal, not as a culmination of 74th Amendment or anything like that, but as very useful instruments of change where they are able to show delivery, and so on. So these were my responses and reflections, Dr. Chatterjee.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Srikanth. I mean, very pertinent observations. And incidentally, I mean, it reminded me, when you talked about there is kind of a convergence of interests, between different parties, the Congress and the BJP and the regional parties at the state level, that there is a convergence of power at the state level, and there is a interest in holding on to that and not to devolve to the urban local bodies. I mean, just last week, incidentally, I was having one conversation with Mr. Ashok Bhattacharya, who was a former urban development minister of West Bengal, and he was urban development minister of West Bengal for 20 years, and now he's a mayor of Siliguri. He's been in two very different roles. And so, he was also, mentioning the same issue that that now, across India, we are seeing kind of a presidentialization of the chief ministers. So, and they don't want the next tier to be a competitor. So, that's why, strong city governments could really become counter political weights to them. So I think, that brings up the question about the future of 74th. I think, 74th has passed 25 years, and there is a time now to rethink, beyond 74th, how 74th needs to be, amendment needs to be restructured. So would you like to share some views, and then we can take the views on this issue from other panelists?
Are you asking for our opinion?
Yeah.
Okay, I really need to sign off because I didn't realize this goes on till 8 p.m. But I'll just say one thing, and then I'll have to take your leave. My apologies. I think the time has come for that, and also 74th Amendment. The fact that we keep talking about it in terms of 74th Amendment as not as the Constitution Article 124, things like that. It also conveys so much that has gone wrong with it or didn't go as per plan. Just like you wouldn't work with the state government to fix the foreign policy with China or Bangladesh, we shouldn't be putting so much emphasis on working with the constitutional amendment for the fixing our cities. Even though it's more painful and there are 30 of them, we have to work with the states. And as Srikanth pointed out, the municipal laws, the Karnataka Municipal Act, the Telangana Municipal Act, now the trend is city level municipal act. We have a Bangalore Act, we have a Hyderabad Act, there's a Greater Mumbai Act, pretty soon there will be ward level acts also, the rate at which they're going. So we need to focus on what is the right place of engagement. I think the people, the state governments are responsible for citizens and their urban infrastructure, their services and all of this. It's not the central government that is responsible, even though central government keeps trying to do various things so that people can directly relate to them, like smart cities and so on. But we must recognize that the theory of subsidiarity and in the true spirit of federalism, the state governments nobody is holding a gun to state government saying, why is your state finance commission not functioning? How many papers have been written on the failure of state finance commissions? How many protests have been made on getting the state finance commissions, as effective and as powerful as the central finance commission? So we at Janaagraha are recognizing these things, and we are focusing our energies on state finance commissions, municipal acts at a state level, working with the people at the grassroots, things like that. When you do that, the legislation that you want to pass will also be benefited from that, and therefore it will become that much stronger. The problem is if you sit and write the legislation in Delhi, it's never going to work, especially for this kind of things. So you want to do that at the trenches, at the cities, and then bring it to states. In Odisha, for example, the department is not at all keen to talk about legislative change, but they're very keen to bring about change in the slums and change in the cities. And now, after several months and years of working on it, now they're opening up and discussing about, okay, how can we make ward officer into a law, ward office into a legislation, a ward committee, can a slum committee become a ward committee? It's fascinating to see how the discussion goes towards legislation after a lived experience of doing things on the ground. I think that is much more foundationally strong and powerful than trying to fix something, that is been on a paper or top down, and then try to fix it on the paper again. So we know that it's not working. So why expend energy? Even though it's more difficult to do this, with all our collective energies, if we go after different states and present different views, and we think that the long-term benefits of that strategy are much higher in that respect. So we should look at talk about the KMC Act Amendment, the Maharashtra Municipal Act Amendment, the Odisha Municipality Act Amendment. These things should become the popular narrative, and we should have webinars on those things and get them going. That's what I would think. My sincere apologies, I have to dial out now. I'm sure Srikanth.
Thank you, Mr. Srinivas. It is a great pleasure listening to you.
Pleasure is all mine.
I think now we can request all other panelists to share their concluding views, just in about 1 minute each person. Maybe we can start with Mr. Tikender Panwar.
No, Tikender sir is watching us on Facebook. Okay, but sir, I had a few questions.
Okay, sure.
To also ask Srikanth sir that as sir also mentioned that now the whole onus, as Lalita ma'am was saying, that our urban also, we have so many SPVs for land, others, we have so many parastatals, and in Bangalore or even Odisha, of all the best places also, we see for even sanitation or for waste workers, there is a movement taken away by Harisudala and so many other organizations also. There is also these things are also becoming thematic because it's also very sectoral. Sir, how do you see that the lower bureaucracy or this kind of organization, how do you deal with that? Because there is corruption at different scale, as we see from different departments also. So how do you see so many plethora of agencies we have, and how to deal with that, especially when we are saying that the ward committees or participatory. So at what level we should do that? During the pandemic, we have really seen the role of technology. And if I compare the way we are moving and the way how Chinese or East Asian cities has gone, so they have also this, I would say, centralized tendency to do things, but they are able to do much more what we are able to do. So how also to break that, because there is so much of utilization of resources, and as our chair was also saying that no politician or the leadership don't want to get into or dwell into 20-30 long-term projects. And as Srinivas sir was also saying that a state finance commission has to be there. Kirti Shah sir do mention that we need to have a state level commission on urbanization. Then we have Department of municipal administration having CDP, DPR also becoming these technical issues. So how do you see the issue of communication? Srinivas sir really highlighted that print media is something really very effective. So how do you see that the people or all the different stakeholders, be it researchers, be it common citizen, or be it those engineers also, because most of the cities have also become just the engineering department or so. Sutendu sir highlight this point that it has really become more of engineered things. So I really thought to know from you that do you see any pan-India similarities or agendas to be worked upon, because there is also divergence, but what can also be some of the few basic things which we can do with our cities. And of course, there is so much of diversity in so many of our cities. So those were, yes, some of my questions I thought to ask. Time and again, there is also state and market debate. Some of the housing scheme, we will also see that the government is really coming and saying that no, that this is someone is taking your money out of it. So government is also moving, market is also moving in a very different dimension, we are all the time putting accountability, transparency, few things, then even, a politician, or I would say bureaucrats also taking, point out of it. We have done many survey we are doing for housing or toilets, other thing, 20,000, 10,000, so many of things also coming, and exclusion, marginalization point of view. So, sir, how also do you see the participation of marginalized community, or there are so many Ambedkar colonies, slum Jhugi, those agendas gelling with the aspiration of also the middle class and other elite parts of the city? Srikanth said, yes.
Sir, you are on mute. Yes.
Yes, several questions packed into one. I'll do my best to string them together. So, firstly, between state and market, see, given the current state of administrative capacities and also the nature of 21st century challenges, the complexity, etc., I don't see a way in which governments in India can solve these challenges alone. In fact, much better resourced, much more capacitized governments in the West are struggling to cope with 21st century challenges, recognizing it, and forming alliances and coalitions and networks, both formal and informal, with people outside of government. So there is now talk not just of vertical decentralization between levels of government, but also horizontal decentralization from outside of government to also empower civil society, academia, business, and media. Therefore, however, in India, I don't think we've there are some experiments, early experiments in forming these, but nothing which is very systematic and sustainable. There is a need for us to embark on those at a city level. And I think these have to be city level partnerships, in the sense that the pride in the city, ownership in the city, your attachment and connection to the city should be the binding force. So even as the billionaires in Bombay or Bengaluru are endowing large foundations for a variety of causes, I think a small percentage of their time and money needs to be spent in their own cities and neighborhoods as well. Similarly with civil society organizations, academics, and others. We are big believers in place being the great unifier and being the ultimate catalyst for change, because that's an important signaling system to the bureaucracy and politicians. And in a similar vein, I'm not though discounting the need for a pan-India alliance, because we are in fairly early stages. Many of us are trying to reinvent the wheel in our own corners of the world. And I don't believe we can afford it. We don't have the time for it. And we don't have the capacities and resources for it. So I think there is a crying need for a national alliance of folks like us. Right? What I mean by folks like us is people like us who care about cities, people like us who care about the governance of cities, and for whom that has been the life's mission. There is a need for a network of that, right? Why is it that today we are getting together? Like I don't know why I'm meeting Dr. Kamath after 7 years, right? Why is there no platform where I couldn't draw on her expertise in working with the fisher folks in Thane Creek sooner? Right? Or why could I not draw on her experience and participation sooner? This doesn't require, if philanthropists in India, if donors in India think of this as priority, they can easily get this done, because we just need a convening platform, right? Gates has put together a convening platform for fecal sludge and septic management, for example. All it needs is a secretariat, and all of us then convening at frequent intervals. So I think there's a crying need for that. So to your question on national network, absolutely. And I'd love to see a network of civil society organizations and academics and others catalyze a national network of mayors and councillors, because we recognize that they are feeling sidelined in their own political parties. Every councillor is an aspiring MLA and doesn't believe that being a councillor or mayor is worth it in itself, which is an anachronism in this day and age, right? When mayors of other large cities are aspiring presidents of their countries. The councillors and mayors in our own cities feel, quite ridiculed in their own political parties. So to strengthen their hands, it's important that we stand shoulder to shoulder with them, even as we work with the supply side political economy, so to speak. On fragmentation and the different SPVs, I absolutely think it's ridiculous. I also think that it's one of those things where the political executive and the bureaucrats work with each other and do what they think is best, as if the municipality is the worst form of government and they're doing a significantly better job. I don't believe there's any evidence to the effect that the state government has been far more effective in urban governance than cities. If anything, the development authorities are far more corrupt, far more inept, far more ineffective than municipalities. Can you tell me any parastatal agencies whose budget gets covered by media or gets discussed in any elected body? Do you know the last time the MMRDA's budget? Can any of you think? Every year the BMC's budget gets decent coverage in media, right? But have you heard of the MMRDA's budget? Why don't you hear of the police's share of the state budget getting discussed? Is public safety less important? See, clearly there's greater transparency when when there is an elected body that governs. I have seen before my own eyes, as somebody who's not a Bangalorean but has naturalized as a Bangalorean over the last 10 years. When I came into the city, the BBMP had a 60% budget variance, and the budgets used to get presented with 3-month delay. But in the last 6-7 years, due to enlightened bureaucrats, due to citizen activism, due to media coverage, and therefore also opposition politicians putting pressure, and the electoral contest between opposing political parties, the BBMP has cleaned up its financial affairs to a far greater extent, whereas the Metropolitan Transport Corporation, the Bangalore Water Supply and Sewerage Board, and the Bangalore Development Authority are terrible in terms of financial governance, far worse than the BBMP at this point in time. Similarly, on corruption, right? You spoke about lower bureaucracy, etc. For some reason, our senior bureaucrats believe that this transfer policy is a great idea because people don't grow roots. I remember inviting over the chief executive of the Greater Manchester Combined Authority. Can you imagine how many years that person has spent in that organization? 20 years. There's a reason why, really competent people become competent and build great organizations, right? Why do we say Hindustan Unilever is a nursery for leaders of Fortune 500 companies? Many of them stay for 30 years, 40 years. They do grow roots. If I'm a resident of the city and I care about the city and I work in the municipal corporation, I want to have a reasonable shot at becoming the chief executive at some point in time. But what do we have now? We have a lower bureaucracy that is completely incompetent, that is completely sidelined, both at once. I'm not just saying they're incompetent, but they're also sidelined, they're ridiculed, right? They are, they don't have any power. And, there is a revolving door of senior bureaucracy, of deputed officers, of the IAS that gets parachuted from the state government, and deputed officers one level below that as well. So how will you grow a strong organization like that? Tell me. How can you ever have a strong organization like that at the city level? You simply can't. You need a committed bureaucracy for the city. So, and there is no evidence to suggest that corruption is any less at the state government level. Maybe it's more centralized. Maybe it's more big picture. Maybe it's not as small as, taking a cut from small-time contractors who are laying footpaths, right? It involves getting a stake in a company, or it involves getting a cut of a larger project. There's really nothing to suggest that corruption is much greater at the city level than state level. I'd like to see some evidence to that effect. So this entire narrative that state politicians and state bureaucrats have built about the ineptitude and corruption of municipalities, in my view, is just bunkum. It's just bunkum. It's not like they've done a great job of it. We know for a fact that many of our big capital cities are directly under the thumb of the chief minister. Has it improved urban flooding in Mumbai? Has it improved the traffic position in Bangalore? It doesn't. They all live in the same city. And we know that they have direct control over the city, but it's not like things have changed dramatically. I believe that radical decentralization would dramatically improve matters, not immediately, but it will set in motion a virtuous cycle. And that will happen in 5, 10, 15 years, because at least citizens will have a shot at trying different options and voting people out. And finally, the solution will emerge. It's not going to be magic, but it's going to be better than the current state of affairs, where we're all lost. And there is zero accountability of state level politicians or state level bureaucrats, zero accountability. There is absolutely no electoral accountability, no bureaucratic accountability. And the reason why state level bureaucrats get away with it is that all measurement systems are only input oriented or process oriented. Very, very rarely they are output oriented. There is nothing that's outcome oriented. There are no report cards that get put out which are outcome oriented. And bureaucrats, have it good, right? They don't have to fight elections. At least state level politicians have to fight elections. So in that sense, I feel that there has to be demand generation by communities and citizens working closely with councillors together, from a demand side. So citizens have to stop looking at politicians as the enemy and co-opt the city level politician as a friend and form those kind of alliances. And we have to work cleverly with power centers and make them see reason in devolving powers, right? Can we make one chief minister's son, can Aditya Thackeray be positioned as the first empowered mayor of Mumbai? Or can KT Ramarao consider being the mayor of Hyderabad as being more powerful than his own position? Remember, the first directly elected mayor of Chennai was Stalin, was MK Stalin, because he was MK Stalin, right? It didn't lead to systemic change beyond that. But can we work on, some incentive mechanism and catalysts to make it attractive? Can we pitch to the BJP and the Congress or any of the mainstream political parties? Can we pitch that the mayor of a small city is the nursery of the next level of leadership for them? So we'll have to think cleverly in this. And I think there is a greater need for synergy and convergence between academics and civil society to begin with, and thereafter with others, because I feel that there's full complementarity between academics and civil society organizations. All of us neither have the expertise nor the inclination or bandwidth to understand, the data and the research underlying this. And academics have that available with them. They are the experts. Similarly, academics and researchers neither have the interest nor the bandwidth nor the ability to take to the streets, in a manner of speaking. I don't mean literally, but I mean figuratively, in mainstreaming these agendas, in pounding the pavement, and doing the last mile connect, which we are able to do and which we want to do. But I think these partnerships are still quite tenuous at this point. So if even 20, 30 of us come together, apply ourselves to this, give this agenda time, I'm sure we can make a difference, because most of us agree on most of these things.
Thank you, sir. And see, you also mentioned fecal sludge management. Shubhagato sir has really, I would say, produced a lot of knowledge in the last decade from his sci-fi institution in CPR.
So you think Shubhagato is an academic and he's produced only knowledge? You should see him work with governments.
Yes. We all have been learning from him.
All of them, I'm sure many of these academics work bilaterally with governments, understand political economy, understand all of this, right? Many of us have to just get together, exchange notes, and focus attention in one or two places to really, showcase change. Currently, our energies are slightly, dissipated. All of us are working in different places. We are working on different agendas at different points in time, not exchanging notes. So,
right,
very quietly and cleverly, Shubhagato has worked political economy as well.
Right, we are well over time. Shubhagato sir, also as a way forward round, we'll just go to each of our panelists for like 1-2 minutes. And I also wanted to ask, sir, since you're also joining from Singapore, and now what we are envisaging, also we have Atmanirbhar Bharat push, making India, export renewed push, also PLI scheme and so many things coming. And we have national infrastructure pipeline having, more than 7,000 infrastructure big projects, so much of $1.5 trillion kind of investment. And now we also have so many of industrial corridors also coming. So how do you see the way forward for the new wave of urbanization, which is also envisaged for the new India, and how to fix whatever wrong we have for all the status of affair of our urban areas? Shubhagato sir, over to you.
Thanks, but I would be delighted to have an answer. Not very sure I have one. Means urbanization in the political economy that we are in is surely means it is kind of under recognized, I think, as a yet. as an instrument for social change. I think means I completely agree with Srikanth's elaboration of the various strategies that one should dwell on, and I would just suggest that maybe Srikanth should take the lead in trying to put together an alliance like this. We'll all be delighted to be part of it. But in terms of the larger processes of urbanization, yes, infrastructure does have a impact on urbanization, and but I think what we are discussing today is the story of the urban itself, not only of the larger processes of urbanization, but the city, but how cities are made itself. The prime example of a new age urban program that I have great faith in is something like, let's say, a very micro project called slum upgrading in a program called the Jaga Mission. So this is interesting because as in literature you hear a lot about how citizens make cities, etc., and there's so much knowledge around and research around how much the contributions of citizens themselves to their cities are. This is a prime example where post-COVID, what the government managed to do is they did a social protection and a wage employment protection kind of a scheme, where in urban areas, the slum dwellers are formed into associations and self-help groups. And these slum dwellers are themselves upgrading their own slums. So they're literally using state budget to create employment for themselves and to create a better infrastructure, improve infrastructure, and actually build the city literally. This is a program where Janaagraha and we also work together. I'll just leave a thought there that we need to look at the whole cycle of the economy, look at the co-benefits from all of these investments before we make the choices alone on these large infrastructure projects too.
Right, thank you. Lalita ma'am, over to you. Please unmute yourself, ma'am. Yes.
I was about to say it's quite late, and I think so many really wonderful things have been said. In fact, Shubhagato, it was great to hear about the Jaga mission a little more, and that's definitely something that we should learn more from, a really landmark, I think, program as well as an act. So look forward to learning more about that in the future. I think just today, in fact, I think Mumbai has, Mumbai's climate change department actually gets active. So just thought I'd share that little piece of, I think, really good news. I don't have any big words to wrap up. This is something that we all need to work on going forward. I think the idea of a network is an excellent one. I think there's really, possibly the one thing that I'll say as an end is, I think it's very useful to think about multiple different strategies and sort of entry points for change and to seize the opportunity that lies in front of us. I think in one sense, the pandemic, what it has done. So I'm particularly thinking about us today at this point, having gone through so many months of first lockdown and then subsequently a series of sort of smaller surges and smaller lockdowns. One of the things that we have learned, I think many people have learned this, but in Maharashtra increasingly it's becoming more acknowledged, is that top-down, unilateral, one-size-fits-all mechanisms rarely work. They don't work effectively, and then a fatigue sets in because people are just not able to comply, also because of the huge cost that such lockdowns place. And so one of the things that's actually started emerging is the realization that given that this virus is with us for is going to be with us for some years to come, the fact, and we are going to see, surges and then falls and rises and falls in different places. So this is not something that we can actually control in a top-down centralized manner. So there's in fact a growing realization, definitely in Maharashtra and maybe in many other states, that actually more, at least practical devolution of power needs to be given to cities and to maybe even district administrations. So even if there's not a move towards changing legislation, some grand big bang approach, what definitely I think is one outcome of this is to open the space for greater powers to cities. And it's been brought about by a crisis. But so what I want to end here basically is to say that I think ours is really living in Indian cities. We just face crises regularly. We're good at dealing with sort of everyday crisis management. So the one thing that crises do for all of us is, I think, open a space of opportunity for trying to think of doing things differently, doing things better, perhaps. So I think that's what I'm going to end with as a more, I think, a hopeful note going forward, that can we in fact look at all the crises that we go through every day and see them also as spaces where we can seize whatever opportunity exists to both build collaborations, but also to seize, for example, openings to strengthen local governments, to work towards greater decentralization. That's it. I'm going to end. Thank you for a wonderful webinar. I learned a lot.
Thank you. Thank you. Samir sir, would you like to have some word?
Yeah, I think Arjun, this has been a very wonderful discussion. Talking anything of urban India, it's extremely difficult because the sheer variety is so huge. You might have a big city like Mumbai, Delhi, and smaller cities in other places. So to find a fit-all statement analysis, causal analysis is always difficult. But I think the larger message that one could have is to know this tackling with urban India is going to be an extremely collaborative activity. So I think that's one takeaway. I had the talks of alliances and networks are already happening. In fact, in Maharashtra, we had a city managers network, from 2004, I believe, and various other alliances also shaping up. So engaging with urban India, or the process of urbanization, is going to be a extremely collaborative measures, and we all will have to come together, leave aside our prejudices, leave aside our other whatever framework that we have, and try to find out what is actually which is going to work, because it cannot be an intellectual exercise or a game that we are playing, that let's try this analysis, let's try that solution. Of course, that I'm not belittling that, but finally, it is going to be the citizens whose pain points are to be reduced and to be removed. And what we are dealing now and what we might be dealing 10 years since or 15 years since, probably it requires great amount of collaboration and cooperation. And that's the point, Arjunji, I would like to leave this discussion, that we must have greater collaboration, cooperation, and lots of innovation. That's everyone will have to work. It's not going to be some people are going to work and others are going to rest back. Each and every person will have to do his own bit to make Indian cities livable and lovable. So thank you, Arjunji.
Thank you, sir. Tathagata sir, would you like to just conclude? Yes.
No, I think, a lot of the things have been said. And I think, we had a wonderful discussion today, bringing people from various viewpoints and to a convergence. I think we can have one takeaway from today's discussion is to have greater conversation carry forward at a city level. Maybe we can think about forming an Indian urban forum as a kind of a broad platform to, as Mr. Srikanth was mentioning, to bring the academics and the civil society activists and the administrators into one platform for exchange of views. I think with that, I'd like to end.
Right. Thank you, sir. Srikanth sir, would you like to have any final word? I'll just give a formal word.
Nothing from myself. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So I would really like to thank all of you for joining in this very important deliberation on this lecture the status quo in India's cities and how to break it. And I'm really thankful to our speakers for this, Srikanth Viswanathan sir and Srinivas sir from Janaagraha for really giving this enriching, thought-provoking, I would say, so much plethora of things to, the think and also discuss about. And yes, of course, on the Jagam mission in Odisha, I would say it's quite popular already. Most of the people at the central government ministry, in fact, last year, it has become a best practice, and who would be better than Tathagata sir to chair again, joining from Bhubaneswar, so we can all learn on that. And we'll try to have that deliberation as well to learn on that issue and learn from all of you. So once again, I would like to thank all of you. And Tathagata sir for chairing this session. Shubhagato sir joining from Singapore. Thank you so much, sir. Must be quite late there. Samirun Hale sir, Lalita Kamath ma'am, Tikender Pawar sir, and also Soumyadip sir not able to join. So thank you everyone. And I wish you a good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a nice evening.
Bye.
Thank you so much.